Hey everyone, welcome back again to another Flutter tutorial, and in this session we will discuss about one of the popular topic known as server driven UI. So as the name suggests, it is the process of driving the UI components or the layouts based upon the data which we get from the server. Or in other words, to keep it simple, it is the process of storing metadata of the UI right in the server and do the logic of rendering here in the front end. So we basically go for this kind of approach in cases where we don't want our users to reinstall or update the app to see the changes of the UI. Rather, the user can just refresh the app and they will be able to see the UI changes in real time. This is the most commonly used approach in most of the popular apps, and in this video we will be addressing the same technique. And to make this possible, we have made use of Firebase Remote Config service, which actually helps us in making this server driven UI approach possible in our Flutter app. Alright, say for example, what we have here is a simple demo app where I have made use of the same server driven UI logic to render this basic UI components here in our Flutter app. What we have here is basically a container, a green container that is going to have a child, which is the Flutter logo, and below which we have a text widget which states hello world, and finally we have again a Flutter logo which is just slightly increased in size. So these UI components, what you see here in this app, is directly driven from the server. That is, the data for rendering this UI is stored in the server. You can also take a look at the Firebase console. So this is going to be the Firebase Remote Config, which actually helps us to perform server-driven UI in our Flutter app. I have here a parameter which is named as dynamic widget. It is going to be a key that is used to uniquely identify the parameter, and each parameter is going to have a value, either a default value and a value which you want to show up in the UI. Each parameter can either be a string, or it can take the number, or it can be a boolean value, or it can also be a JSON. We will be making use of JSON, which will be more appropriate for our use case. Okay, and you can either provide the description, which is totally optional, and below which we have a conditional check. So this is another feature which we have in Firebase Remote Config, where you can actually apply validation check for your data. And the condition what I have here is that if the system current date time is before New Year, then it should make use of this JSON bundle what I have given over in this value tab. Or else if this condition gets failed, it should directly move to this default value. Okay, so basically it is like a if statement. If it is true, it will render this JSON value, or it should give us it should actually throw this JSON value to the front end. Else if the condition gets false, it should actually provide this JSON bundle to the front end. As of now, the condition is true, therefore we have this JSON value being thrown to the front end, and the front end will do the rest of the rendering logic to build up the UI components. This is going to be a nested JSON, where the first JSON value is going to be a container with an height and color as specified, and again it is going to have an attribute. In other words, in Flutter terms, you can have it as the child. So the container is going to have a child which is of type Flutter logo, and the size is given as 200. Okay, so this is the first UI component which is being rendered in the UI screen, and the second UI widget is going to be a text widget, and the data is going to be the hello world. And finally the last Flutter widget is going to be again a Flutter logo with sizes 910. So we have basically three different JSON values for rendering three different UI components in the front end side. Okay, say for example, as I discussed earlier, if the condition is false, it will try to make use of this JSON bundle, where we have made use of two JSON value. Both is going to be the Flutter logo, which will be rendered one below the other. All right, for this UI, so for this JSON value, it is going to render this green container, hello world, and this Flutter widget, Flutter logo. All right, say for example, if I change this text widget from hello world to hello, and I just want to change this container color, is the value, and if you are okay with the changes, you can just click save and save again and make use of this publish change. Once the change is published, you will notice that earlier we used to have the hello world and green container, and upon refreshing the app, the color of the container should change to blue, and this text widget should only show hello. So you can see here the container color is actually dynamically changed in runtime as well as the text widget. Right? You can also check for the validation as well. Say for example, here in the daytime, you can just have any number of validation, like you can validate or provide conditional check based upon the platform like Android, iOS, or web, or you can also make use of the country or the region and make the validation accordingly. Just I will just make use of the date time now and try to. Now what we are targeting is that we just need to make use of this default value being rendered, and to make this possible we need to make this conditional check statement as false. Therefore, let me specify it as the new year. If it is before new year, if it is after new year, then it should render this value, which is actually a false statement right now. So right now it is not true. Therefore, the default value should be shown up in the UI screen. Right? Let me save this and make the change and publish them. Now, if I refresh this app, I should not see this container and the text widget and Flutter logo. Rather, I should only see two Flutter logos, one below the other. Let's try it out. Yeah, you see that since the condition gets false, you get this default value, which is two Flutter logos being rendered in the UI screen. Actually, our JSON value actually stayed the same, where we have two Flutter logos of size 20 pixels, and since the condition is false, we get this default value thrown to the front end, and the mapping is done accordingly. All right. First, we need to insert two dependencies in your spec. So directly go to your spec and add these two dependencies. They are the Firebase Remote Config and Firebase Core. Since we are making use of the Firebase, we need to add these dependencies in your spec and always check for the latest version. And after adding these two dependencies, let's move on to the main.dat file. Here in the main.dat file, update the main method accordingly. After doing so, let's start with the initial route, where the initial route points to my home page. And here in the my home page, it is nothing but a stateful widget class, where I have the UI skeleton ready. That is, the body is going to take a single child scroll view, and it is again going to have the child, which is the column widget, which means that the JSON bundle which we get from the server is mapped to the Flutter components and is rendered one below the other in the column wise manner. All right, so the basic setup is actually ready. Now let's first try to get the JSON value from the Firebase. That logic needs to be written down separately in a separate dart file, and I have made use of this remote config.dart file to carry those Firebase components here. And inside this class, let me make use of the Firebase remote config instance and store them in the remote config variable. And again create a method separately called initialize config, which is going to initialize the Firebase remote config and provide the fetch timeout and minimum fetch interval. So it is advised to provide this the maximum value like 12 hours, but for this video tutorial I have made use of 1 second. You can either give it as 12 hours, which is more suitable for most of the use cases. And after which we need to make use of the method which is fetch and activate, which is going to fetch the data which is stored in the Firebase remote config. And we need to make use of the get string of method and pass in the parameter key. So this dynamic widget is what we have as a key in our Firebase remote config. As you see here in the Firebase config, the parameter key is defined as the dynamic widget. So we need to pass that value over here in this get string of method. After it is done, you just need to return that value. Okay. This method is pretty much responsible for getting that particular JSON bundle from the Firebase remote config. It doesn't do anything of mapping here. Now let's try to call this method from the home screen page. Let's directly move to the my home page, and here we need to and here let me just define a list which is server widget that will hold the list of UI widgets. And here in the init state, we need to make use of the get value. We will be calling the get value method inside the init state, where I'll be calling that initialize config method, which we have defined right now. And the return value is actually stored in the server JSON list. So this server JSON list is going to hold all this data which we get from this Firebase remote config. Okay, so server JSON list will actually contain this value. Okay, so the fetching is actually done. Now what we need to do is we need to map this JSON value. So we need to map this JSON value to the corresponding Flutter widget. Okay, so let's just define that mapping logic right in the separate dart file. and that is named as widget underscore map, and here inside this dart file is where we will be writing the logic to map that particular JSON to the corresponding Flutter widget. Alright, let's first define a class for that, which is named as map data to widget, and where we will be having a server widget list. After which we will have a method called map widget and pass in the server UI. And for each element in that particular server UI, so the server UI is nothing but the JSON list which we get from the Firebase Remote Config instance. Okay, and make use of the JSON decode method to decode that particular JSON bundle to the corresponding element. And the element type is now stored inside a string value called type. Now we will be making use of that toWidget method and passing the element and the type as a parameter. And this toWidget of method is something that does the hard work of mapping the corresponding JSON data to the Flutter widget. Okay, and finally for this method we will be returning this server widget list as a response to this method call. Okay, so this is the method we will be calling right from the home page. Now let's define this toWidget of method. So this toWidget of method, as discussed, it is going to take the element which is the JSON value and the type of that particular JSON. Now we will be making use of the switch statement and pass in the type. Based upon the type, if it is the Flutter logo, it will be returning the Flutter logo widget itself, which means that for the particular JSON value, if the type is going to be the Flutter logo, then we return the Flutter logo as the response to this toWidget of method call, which is then added to this server widget list. Likewise, if there is a value for size, you can specify it as, you can actually get that size value with the help of element of size. Likewise, if the type is going to be a container, then we will be returning the Flutter container itself. And to get the width value, you need to specify element of width. Likewise for height, and just the same way for the color. And the child for this container, you can again make use of the toWidget of method and pass in that element and the type. You can actually see here. Now we are trying to pass this JSON value as a child for this element. Therefore, we need to make use of the attribute before that. Okay. So this is something going to be kind of recursive function where we again will call the toWidget of method. And for this value, it is again going to be a Flutter logo, and it is going to return the Flutter logo widget to this function call. So the child will be assigned with the Flutter logo widget. Likewise, it backtracks to the container widget and will try to return the container for the function called toWidget of method. In this way, it will bubble up and try to add each widget to this server widget list. Okay, and again, the last type which we have here is the text widget. So let's also define that as well. So therefore, if the type is going to be the text widget, then we need to return the text widget and the data which is stored in the text data. And for the default value, we just return the text widget with the error text. So this is the core logic of mapping that particular JSON value to the corresponding Flutter components. So this way you can just go on defining each and every Flutter components and render them accordingly. Now we have defined this map data to widget. Now let's make use of this method and call this map widget in the home page. Now here in the home page, we need to make use of that map widget of method and pass in the server JSON list, which is going to be the JSON bundle, and make use of set state to update the state. Now the entire widget which is returned as a result of this map widget is stored in this server widget. Now we need to make use of the server widget inside this column to render the components. So to render that, we will be making use of the 3 dots followed by the server widget list, which is actually a spread operator, and if I refresh this app, you will be able to see the changes. Alright, so this is all about how you can make use of the server driven UI logic with the help of Firebase Remote Config to render the UI components in your Flutter app. If you want to make more detailed tutorial on this, let me know them in the comments below. Hope you guys found this tutorial useful. If you do so, consider subscribing, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.